Hello world, and we are back. My name's Kyle Fischl, and this is going to be episode 95 of my poker vlog. It's been a bit of time since my last video. Been in Vegas for 2 months straight, pretty much, playing all the smaller events of the World Series of Poker. I have 3 cash game sessions from the trip that I did vlog, so in the next few weeks, you'll get to see a Resorts World and a Bellagio session, both of which have a bunch of special guests, different vloggers. We're at the same table as me, so they're going to be pretty interesting. But without further ado, let's roll the tape.
Like a terrifying death trap for little kids.
Alright, so the Colossus was an amazing experience for me. Early on, I built a massive stack. At one point, I was even a top 5 chip leader for my flight, which was awesome. Dwindled down a bit, but was able to find a bag and make it to day 2 and secure my first WSOP cash ever. Shortly into day 2, I get it all in, 5s versus ace queen. Not exactly the run out we're hoping for, but we did get our first cash ever, which we're quite happy about. And as the day was early, it was time for a cash game session at the Wynn. And before I could even get my camera out, I play a massive pot where my opponent turns a full house against top trips, and I lose $1,000. So we are currently into the game for $2,600 as we had to top off, and now the goal is to battle back to even as we started out quite poorly in this session. First interesting hand caught on camera. I'm in late position. I raised to $20 with pocket aces. There are 3 callers, so we are 4 ways to a flop of King Jack 6 2 clubs. An okay board for aces. Sometimes I'm going to run into King Jack, but a lot of times I'm going to run into just single pairs that I can get a lot of value from. So I start out this hand by betting $35. Well, 2 different players call. Not super happy about that. When the turn is the 8 of diamonds, pretty significant brick. That shouldn't really complete any 2-pair combinations. So when it's checked to me, I'm not going to slow up on this particular card. I'm going to bet $95. The button folds, but the small blind opponent decides to call a second time. Likely going to check back a lot of rivers. However, the deuce of spades is definitely one of the safest ones I could ever hope for. So hopefully a disbelieving King X or Jack X will pay off a third barrel. I fire $150, but my opponent folds Queen 10 face up, and somehow I am lucky enough to fade a 4-card straight flush with 2 cards to come. Next interesting hand. The +1 player opens to $20. I'm in the cutoff with pocket aces a second time. I'm going to 3-bet this one to $75. Well, the big blind, who was in the process of rebuying, decides to call the $75, and the +1 player decides to call as well. So we're going 3 ways to a flop of 10-7-3, 2 diamonds. I'm not super concerned with this board, even facing 2 players. No one should really have too many middling cards, especially when it's a 3-bet pot. So when checked to me, I decide that this is one of the times where I'm going to take a strong hand and check back and protect my checking range. The turn is the 9 of clubs. Now I'm definitely going to size up to about $200 plus, as there's 2 different flush draws out there and plenty of 2 face card holdings that have picked up straight draws. However, the big blind leads out for $150. And if anyone is possible to have a random 2 pair, it's definitely this player. So I'm going to definitely just call this bet. When the river is the 8 of diamonds, it's very disgusting.
Is it bad?
Dude, it's really bad.
No, it isn't.
Have
It
you
isn't. No.
seen what
I'm
you're
not gonna
telling
look
me?
at it.
You're going to a hospital.
Any jack is a straight, and the obvious diamond flush draw comes through on the river. And my opponent bets $300. After a bit of thinking, I'm very disappointed in my flop check. I think I'm much more likely to win the hand if I just play it standardly and bet out and price out a lot of his middling hands so they can't see the river. But I just fold face up. And my opponent's nice enough to show me pocket jacks. So I'd say his particular hand is never folding to a flop bet, and then I just become victim of the run out. So I don't know, maybe I saved myself some money with my flop check. But the next hand of note, there's one limp. I limp with pocket sixes. A third player limps before the cutoff raises to $25. The first limper folds, but I call and the other limper calls, so we're going 3 ways to a flop of 6 deuce deuce. It is hard to flop better than that. My particular opponent I've seen be very aggressive throughout the session. They've always bet when checked to, so very happy to be against this particular opponent with my hand. I check, middle position player checks. My opponent bets $50. I am extremely happy to just call and hopefully let my opponent improve and keep firing. When the turn is the king of hearts, I checked my opponent a second time, and this time they bet $85. Now I definitely want to be able to play for stacks in this hand. I have the best hand pretty much always. Hoping my opponent somehow connected with the king with some kind of ace king or king X type hand. I'm going to raise super small and hopefully get it to a size where stacks can get in on the river. So I raised to $225. My opponent thinks for a decently long time before letting it go. And with this particular person, I don't ever think they actually had a king here. Likely had air and probably should have check raised river instead. But we'll still take the win. Next hand of note. With 2 limps, I'm in late position with king queen offsuit. Definitely going to raise this one up. 2 Broadway cards is always good enough for me. I raised to $25. Well, the big blind calls and the first limper calls as well. So we're going 3 ways to a flop of 10-10 jack. Rainbow. This is a board I'm pretty happy to bet on. 2 overs and open-ended straight draw is pretty good. When both players check to me, I throw out a small wager of $35. And at this point, I wish I wasn't turned around ordering a drink and watched my opponent's show of fake folding 3 times before calling, because that's usually pretty strong, but I did not see that in the moment.
I am talking to you. You are not listening.
On the turn, ace of spades making my straight. Extremely happy to bet small again. Hopefully just go for 3 streets of value. I bet $50, and my opponent snap does a massive raise to $385. This particular opponent I've seen do this exact raise with ace X when turning an ace before in the session. So I definitely think it's possible he has ace king, ace queen, something like that, where it just made top pair plus straight draw after calling with a gut shot, which I'm doing very, very well against. I don't really think it's possible he could have pocket aces or pocket jacks because he was a limp caller. And then that leaves very few combinations of 10 jack or ace 10. So thinking there's much more combinations of pair plus straight draw and not a whole lot of full houses he can have. And the fact that if he did have a full house, why would he raise like 8 times my bet? Seems like it'd be very easy to get me to fold with that raise. So I don't really believe this guy. I think he has ace X and is just trying to push me out of the pot. Since he only has about $200 behind, I'm definitely happy to just get it in right here. I just put in my stack of black chips and he snap calls and happily flips over ace 10. It is tough to win at poker when you put in over $600 drawing dead. Not a profitable play long term. Total count was $605. Not the greatest decision, but it is one that happened.
Fucking donkey, it hurts so much.
If you think I can turn this around, please hit the subscribe button. Thank you. So now the stack is quite short, not very close to $2,600, but we're going to keep battling. So with 1 limp, a middle position player raises to 15 and there's 1 caller. I have queen jack of clubs, a hand that plays very well multi-way, but if I'm ever going to get back to even, I need it to be a bigger pot when we play multi-way. So I do a very tiny sized 3-bet to $50, hoping to get everyone in there for a larger sized pot, and the small blind calls and both of the players who paid 15 make call as well. So we're going 4 ways to a semi-bloated pot of queen 4-3 2 hearts. Well, that's above average, I would say. When everyone checks to me, I put out an under half pot size bet, just trying to get value for my queen against any flush draw. I bet $85. All my opponents fold, so that's definitely a way to help get back to even, I would say.
A good one.
But sometimes this game can be cruel, like when you have straight flush over straight flush.
to a jack and the 6. Six.
Ouch.
We both flopped it too.
I don't care what universe you're from. That's gotta hurt.
The cutoff raises to $20. The button calls. When I look down at pocket queens out of position in the small blind, I raise to $85. The big blind is the only caller, and the two players who put in $20 fold. So we are heads up to a flop of 8-5 deuce rainbow. Extremely safe board, especially for a 3-bet pot. So I think I can happily down bet this and honestly just win a lot of the time. I expect my opponent to fold most of his hands. I bet $60. My opponent decides to call. The turn is the king of diamonds. Very bad card. My opponent could easily have peeled with ace king or any kind of king X type holding.
Well, that's great. That's just fucking great, man. Now what the fuck are we supposed to do? We're some real pretty shit now, man.
Quite disappointed to see that card. I check. My opponent quickly bets $100. I'm not going to fold for just one overcard and one bet, so I make the call. When the turn is the 4 of diamonds, I check, preparing to call a bet of a decent size at some frequency. But my opponent checks it back, so I just flip my hand, and it's good. So winning several smaller hands helped the stat grow a little bit. We are still a ways away from being even. Next hand of note. I'm in middle position with Queen 10 offsuit. I raised to $20. We are not going to get back to even by folding. Well, the cutoff calls, one of the blinds call, so we are going 3 ways to a flop of Jack, 8, 6, 2 diamonds. When it checks to me, I think my opponents could all just miss a high percentage of the time, and this board kind of connects with my hand. There's plenty of cards I can continue with. A king I'd happily continue with, a 10, queen, 9, even an ace. I would happily throw out the second barrel. So I bet $30, already planning to go 3 streets on certain runouts. Well, the cutoff decides to call, and the blind decides to fold. And when the turn is the most perfect offsuit 9 you've ever seen, ever, I now want to bet small on the turn and bet huge on the river. Hopefully raise the size of the pot so I can get paid at my large river bet. So I bet $50, hoping my opponent has some piece of the board and can be able to pay off a second and possibly third bet. Well, to my surprise, my opponent decides to raise to $175. And I'm holding the nuts. So that's pretty good.
Show me the money!
Because of the diamond flush draw out there and the many straight draws that are still possible, I think I have to 3-bet this hand right now. If my opponent happens to have like 5-7 or 10-7, he's going to get all the money in with me, and he'll be drawing dead, which would be great. If he has like 9-10 of diamonds, then I'm sure he'll happily call this raise and be drawing pretty much to a diamond. Thinking I have to get as much money in now, barring many scary river cards, I 3-bet the turn to $500. My opponent thinks for quite a long time before calling. When the river is the 7 of clubs, it definitely connects the board more, but I still have the nuts. So really just hoping my opponent has like 9-10 and just has to pay off straight over straight. I go for an all-in sizing. I think it'd be pretty tough for my opponent to put me on a 10, as I'm a pre-flop aggressor, hoping I can get a full double up with this all-in sizing. However, my opponent does not think too long before letting it go. Could not get all of the money on this hand, but we'll definitely take a pretty big size pot.
Show me the money!
Congratulations.
Next interesting hand. The button straddles off like a $100 stack, and it folds to me in middle position. I have ace-10 of diamonds. Pretty happy to get this in for $100, especially when he's straddled and pretty much ready to rebuy, but hasn't yet. So I raised to $35, thinking he's just going to jam like always. Unfortunately, the 9 of diamonds is an exposed burn card. Pretty bad when you're holding suited diamonds, but shouldn't matter that much. Ironically, the button just calls, leaving himself about $50 behind. When the flop is 2-3-4, I'm not really sure I'd fold for any flop, but that particular one's pretty good for ace-10. So I put him all in, and he calls pretty quickly.
You weren't actually in for that.
I just have an ace.
No good, man. No good.
The run out leaves me with ace high, but ace high is good. So that's pretty fun. And a final hand of note. There is an under the gun straddle. The small blind completes for $10. I'm in the big blind with pocket queens. I raise to $35. Well, the under gun player raises to $135. And it folds back to me. I don't think I can fold pocket queens in this specific dynamic. Although he could have aces or kings, but he could also have jacks, tens, ace X, maybe king queen suited. He has plenty of hands that I think would play the exact same way, especially because it's big blind into straddle, so I decided to just make the call here. When the flop is 10-4 deuce, rainbow, I decided to check to the pre-flop aggressor. He bets $150. I'd say right now he's trying to tell the story he has aces or kings, but I'm not going to fold queens to just one bet when they're still an overpair. When the turn is a 5, I check to him a second time. This time my opponent checks it back. On the river 9, I don't think anything has changed in this particular hand. If I lead out, I think I'm always getting called by aces and kings, and I probably make my opponent's ace X hands just fold. However, if I check, I think ace X still has a chance to bluff at it and hopefully get me to fold. And my opponent may even value bet ace 10 here. So I check, hoping to be able to check call a decent sized bet from my opponent and not have to look at kings or aces. But my opponent checks it back, and queens are good for a last hand of this session.
That's it, man. Game over, man. It's game over.
So for this win, 2-5, 1500 max game, I'm into the game for 2600, out of the game for 2135, which is a loss of $465 across 8 hours, equates to $58 an hour or 11 big blinds an hour. If you've watched all the way to this point, thank you. I appreciate it. Please consider hitting the subscribe button. It helps out the channel a great deal. And please be on the lookout for the Resorts World and the Bellagio session. They'll be coming out in the next 2 weeks, so stay tuned for that. Thank you.